Today's webinar is going to be focused on management practices for robot optimization and the prevention of leaking cows. Our speakers today are Anton Borst and Al Moll, two FMS consultants with AgriHub. They are part of a larger FMS team that serves our provinces, with Jan Willem and Christian in Manitoba, Melissa in Ontario, Al and Alyssa here in Alberta, and Anton supporting AgriHub in Saskatchewan as a whole. Please use the chat to ask any questions you have during today's presentation, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. With that, I'm going to pass you on to Anton to begin.
All right, thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'll share my screen here. Hopefully you can all see that. All right, so this afternoon we have a presentation about management practices for robot optimization and the prevention of leaking cows. And then leaking cows is a topic that we as FMS people get asked about regularly, and there's some complaints that sometimes we have leaking cows, and farmers are trying to figure out what's causing it. So we'll do a bit of a discussion on that. So I'll do the first part of the presentation, dealing mostly with milk access and how it affects potentially leaking cows, and then Al will take over on a bunch of other components. So what is a leaking cow, and what do we consider a leaking cow when we talk to farmers? So we consider a cow to be a leaking cow if she has just been milked, or if she's multiple hours away from her next milking, while she's standing in the stall or in the barn. We don't consider a cow really a true leaking cow if she is actually overdue to be milked and has not visited the robot, because that quite often is a factor of her being lame or unmotivated, or because there is no free time at the robot. So it has nothing really to do with the cow itself. So what do we look for when it comes to leaking cows, and things that we can consider? And those are milk access and milking intervals, and I'll do some discussion about that. And like I mentioned earlier, Al will be talking about horizon settings, bimodal milkings, liners, and then we can how to identify leaking cows, and nutrition. So we'll get right into it here. When it comes to milk access, how can a milk access table help us with leaking cows? And how it can help us is that it can keep cows from being milked too often or with too little milk in their udder. And it can vary milk permission from fresh versus mid-lactation versus pre-dry of cows. So those are the three compartments of your milk access table. I think you're probably all familiar with a milk access table, but there are some examples of it later. It's the 3/3 of the milk access, and that's fresh, mid-lactation, and pre-dry off. But what can a milk access table not do? And one thing it cannot do, it cannot make cows come to the robot. And no matter if we open it up, it will not make more cows come that aren't going. So it's not going to fix your ration or your feeding challenges, if that's the reason why your cows are not coming and they're leaking. It's not going to make up for poor layout, if you're in that situation. Or robot access. So let's say you have no free time on your robots, and it's also, the milk access table will also not make up for if you have poor pen routines. And with that, we mean if you're in the pen every hour and a half throughout the day and cows are therefore being chased away from the robot. But who often wants milk access to be more open when they are trying to deal with situations? And often it can be third-party advisors or farmers that are challenged or feel challenged with visits that aren't high enough. And then the tendency or the default reaction is to open up milk access. But when we do that, on most herds, is the cows that respond to a more open access are cows that are already regularly going to the robot. So it's your 3.5 time visit cow or your 4 time visit cow that is now going to go 4.5 times or 5 times. And the target cow that we're actually aiming to get to the robot more often, the lame one, the lazy one, the new heifer, etc., she is not coming more often. And actually, when we open up milk access too far, especially when we have free time problems, it can have the result that those cows that are challenged to come already in the first place come even less, because now the cows that are used to visiting and are dominant, they go more. So what we end up with quite often is that we get fake averages on the dashboard. Our average milkings on the dashboard may go up, let's say from 2.9 to 3.1, but not necessarily that the lame and the stale or the new cows are coming more often. And the cows that, do like to feed, if we have a feeding challenge, they still come, and they just come more often because they can get more feed. So while the dashboard may show improvement on average milkings, there's quite often other factors that suffer. And that includes getting poor milking performance because we're milking cows with too little milk in their udder, and more leaking cows. And we'll get into that more, how that is caused by too open and milk access at different times. So what does too open and milk access actually look like? On a farm, it can look like visits over 3 average. The optimum is 2.7 to 3. If you have a really high performance herd, over 3 may be acceptable and maybe optimal. But other than that, it's really not necessary for optimum performance. The other thing we can sometimes see is, and I will often see, is low average yield per milking. So every time a cow comes in a box, we're only, for example, harvesting 8 liters or something like that. We may see a lot of milkings that are at less than 6-hour interval, and we'll get more into that. But milkings at less than a 6-hour interval are not what we want to see, and they are detrimental to performance. And quite often, if we have too open milk access, we will see higher connection attempts and often more failed milkings. So those are all things that you can see on farm. Your FMS people, what can they see in behind? We monitor the amount of irregular intervals. We can see that they will go up when we have milk access to too open. And we can also see how many milkings actually happen. And I have a few examples of that, of milkings that happen with less than 6-hour intervals. And we can see that we get more bimodal milkings. And I will talk about what a bimodal milking is and how they're created later on in the presentation. But we can see the number of bimodal milkings that we have on each farm. First, on irregular intervals, Laley has done research, or they have shared research with us, that irregular intervals are actually negative for udder health, but they're also negative for production. So here's an example of a graph with a herd that has obviously a very high level of irregular intervals. I think this is probably the record I've seen, because at one point in time they're almost hitting 100%. And what would be considered like an irregular interval? For example, if you have a cow that is, going 3 times in 24 hours, but the milkings are, in one case, 6 hours apart, and then the next milking is 18 hours later. So even though, and then like at the 24th hour, she goes again. So you may get the 3 milkings in the 24 hours, but at very irregular intervals, and that is negative. The other thing, and we'll share more on that later, is we can see the amount of milkings that are bimodal. And that is through the tools that FMS people have provided by Laley. The goal with bimodal milkings is to have no more than 20%, preferably no more than 10%. But you can see in this herd that there is a lot of orange and red. And basically 40% of the milkings that are happening in this herd are bimodal milkings. So we don't want to see that. And the same thing with the tool that we have for evaluating what is happening with milking intervals. Red is less than 6 hours and less than 8 liters. The orange is less than 6 hours. So you can see in this herd, in week 52 and week 1 and 2 and 3 of 2026, 40% of the milkings on this farm are happening at less than 6 hours. So which is way too short an interval. We want to see a lot of green We want to see a little orange and a little red and a very little blue, but the blue is long intervals. So an example of a herd that has, and what the fallout is of two open and milk access. This is again sharing what milkings are happening at less than 6 hours. But now this is the tool that we have. We can see it per lactation days in milk. So you can see that a lot of them are happening at, early lactation. That's where most of these short intervals or whatever happen. And you can see actually that in late lactation, we have a few more late cows that go late. But this is a big concern that these cows between 15 and 60 days are, well over half the milkings are at less than 6 hour intervals. So what can your dashboard look like if you actually are dealing with, two open and access? If you are producing 30 liters, but your visits are 3.3 average, and therefore you have a high cell count and you have very little free time. And what does that result in? Something like this. We end up damaging the teat ends, and we'll have some more pictures on that stuff also later in the presentation, but also individual cow grafts that now have other health issues. So what does a well-adjusted milk access table improve? First of all, it will improve udder health and teat end condition and your somatic cell count, but it will also improve production. It would also improve your cost of doing business, because obviously if you're not milking cows that don't need to be milked, it's less water, less electricity, less liner use, less chemical, less teat dip. It's also going to improve your robot capacity, whether you measure that in liters per day or whether that you measure that in kgs of quota filled, and it's also often will improve attachment performance, because we're not trying to attach the milking unit to udders that have teats that are touching because there's no milk in them. So how do we then set up milk access? So there's some general guidelines that we look for and that we use. We look for not having any intervals of less than 6 hours. So that basically means that there's a max of 4 milkings per cow. Now there's a few exceptions to that. If you have a really high producing herd or early lactation, you might go over that a little bit, but not a lot. The other thing that we look for in your milk access table, and there'll be some examples, but that our optimum yield is basically 1/3 or getting close to 1/3 of the production of that group. So if we have, for example, have a group of cows that is doing 36 kgs, their milk access table, the optimum yield could be close to 12 or gets close to 12. And then at the start of lactation, we make that number a little lower so that they can get milked a little more often. And at the end of lactation, close to dry off, we bump that number up because we're trying to dry the cows off. We need to remember that any time that you change the milk access, it should be made slowly and in small increments. And absolutely, if you're not sure on how to do it or why to do it, please first talk to your FMS person. Like, it's not something you want to arbitrarily do and see what happens, because we have had situations where somebody made a change, did not see an immediate impact, but 3 months later, it's not going like it used to, and then it can be traced back to an unintended milk access table change. So please be careful. The other thing, when we're discussing milk access, we need to remember Laley's 10%, I call it the fudge factor, and that is that numbers on the milk access table are not absolute. Within 10% of hitting any of those numbers, the cow will get milked. I'll explain that a little bit more. But first off, a little more on milking frequency. This was a study that was done that we found, but it's clear that if you look at production for the cows at 4 visits and 4.5, it basically tops out. And actually, when we get more visits, more frequent visits, then we actually see a drop in production. So how do we set up a milk access table? I have here an example for, let's say, a lactation 1 group that is doing 30 liters. And I mean, there can be slight variations on this, But first off, when I was talking about the different thirds of the milk access table, this would be considered the first third. So that's the first 60 days after calving. So you see that 60 up here. And then you have the second third. So that would be between 60 days after calving and 21 days before dry off. So this would apply. And this is what applies in the short period right before dry off. Now, like these numbers are not in concrete, and we need to, personalize every milk access table for every herd, and we can definitely help do that. But you can see, for example, on this herd, they are managing that 30-liter group by having a minimum set for 3.6. So if we have add a 10% fudge factor to that, that basically means 4. That means that every heifer in the first 60 days at about 6 hours can get milked. Because if we take, 24 divided by 4, that's 6 hours. So at 6 hours, they can all get milked, but the maximum is only, closer to 4.6 or 4.8. But as long as they have 9 liters, they can go more often. And then in the middle part, you can see that once they get past 60 days, that the expected optimum yield that is required of the cows is slightly higher, but the maximum visit is lowered a little bit more until it's slightly over 4. Because when we set this exactly at 4, well, obviously the fudge factor is one thing, but also cows are not, like some cows are like clockwork, but not exactly like clockwork. So when we set it like this, there's the maximum most cows in actuality will be close to 4. And of course, the minimum level of milkings later on in lactation, we drop that number down to gain robot capacity, but still every cow in this scenario, but at about 9.5 hours would have milking permission. Often with heifers, this can be between 45 and 60 days. So I think we look at some graphs and we'll share some of those, but it is something to keep in mind that for heifers, we want this longer than for cows because they're not used to the robots. So we do give them a longer period to acclimatize to the robots. Okay. Now, if we, for example, do a group of cows, and we definitely want to have a separate milk access table for heifers versus cows. So most of you will have that. We still see the odd example out there of people that do not. But because cows give more milk and because they don't need the same period to acclimatize to the robots, we want to be more strict with them and we want to require higher production per milking. So in this example on this farm, I mean, we're looking for a 36-liter herd. You can see that optimum yield that we kind of aim for, being a third, is about 12. And then in early lactation, it is slightly less. It's 11, but it's bumped up for late lactation when we're trying to dry the cows off a couple higher. But you can also see here that in early lactation, we're not letting them go at 6 hours. It's closer to 8 hours. But still, the cows that produce can go more often, up to 4 times a day, but in reality, almost 4.5 times a day because of the lily fudge factor. But it also shows here that the period of acclimatization is shorter. It's at 30 days. Okay, and yeah, before dry off, similar, where we really want to restrict the milkings and we want the cows to not produce too much milk at dry off. And we know that is a constant struggle, even when we do this, and even if we change this to 21 days before dry off in a lot of herds, high-producing herds anyways. So how do we evaluate the milk access table, like how it's actually working? And that's an important thing. And there's tools on your farm that you can look up on your own horizon. Here's a few of them, and I'll share like a brief glimpse of all of them that are good tools to look at on your own farm, and it kind of tell you what's happening in your herd. So, but also the dashboard itself is a good tool, but make sure that you check all the groups. So if you just look at your dashboard and it says, oh, average visits 2.8, make sure you click on it. Like, what are your cows doing versus your heifers? Because it's not uncommon that, the heifers are doing 3.4, but the cows are only doing 2.6. All right, the dashboard looks great. The averages can hide a lot of bad stuff. So that's the lesson that we want to share. Just dig a little deeper once in a while to make sure that all the groups of cows are going the right amount of times. And then report 52 is a really good report. Report 35 is the one I use. Report 41. There's also report 42, but I'll share these three. First, we'll look at report 52, an example of report 52. And this basically, there's a lot of information on it. First off, it has the daily production. So that's the red. And you can see here's actually your lactation curve of the cows that are currently in that group in that barn. And this one, this report is also selectable per lactation. So in this case, we're looking at a lactation 1 graph, but you can, by clicking it and unclicking it in the top right-hand corner, you can also look at lactation 2 or lactation 2 and 3, whatever you want. So this is the current production graph in this herd. It also shows your average amount of milkings. So that would be the blue bars. So that is right here. And you can see here, like that they start off a little slow, have a bit of a bump. Maybe here is where they back off on the fetching. You see a bit of a dip. But you can see that by day, I don't know, like about 30 or so, they're hitting 3 milkings a day. And then it slowly increases. And here you can see, oh, here the visits are dropping off. So we can see that this is likely where the milk access table changes, because you can see the drop off. So when we look at this, we want to look also at the production at the same time. So when the milk access table changes, what actually happens to production? And the interesting part is that in this scenario, it almost seems like the production is dropping off a little bit in this herd. So that is something to monitor. So is that something that we want to fix? How big a drop is it? I mean, if it was a significant drop, definitely we want to fix it. You can also see that when the visits drop, the heifers are not super pleased, because if you look at these purple bars, is the refusals. So you can see that this is obviously having an effect on the animals, and there's a bit of confusion going on in the barn because visits drop, but refusals go up. So the heifers try to keep going. So this is a really good graph for evaluating, milk access. But while we're here anyways, it's also great for evaluating feed, because this red line is your feed table, and you can either, you can select and unselect any of these things on this graph. But you can see the changes in the feed table here. And it's a great tool for evaluating, when does a feed table change? Do I see a production change? And if that's the case, if the answer would be yes, I think you want to talk to your nutritionist and say, hey, maybe we're cutting them back too far because I see a marked production change. Okay, so we don't want to see any dips. The opposite of that, of course, if you don't see any dips, you might also want to talk to your nutritionist and say, hey, can we cut it anymore? And he'll probably say no, because I like selling you pellets. But that's a conversation for you to have with them, not for me to interfere. So there's a lot of good information on this one, but it's a great tool. What is actually happening on your milk access, or how are your cows actually performing? And especially on the lactation 1 graph, I would really encourage people to look at what's happening in early lactation with your heifers, and how's my training that I'm doing actually working. Because this thing, like this report, will actually tell you, are they actually visiting 2 or 3 times a day, or what's actually what is actually the result? Because sometimes people are surprised how long it takes before they even hit 2 visits a day. Another tool that we look at is report 35, and we can sort that one by lactation days, but there's lots of ways to sort it. I often look at it and I sort it by lactation days, and I'm looking in these early lactation cows. What are we getting per milkings, and are we getting refusals? Basically, it's looking at my fresh cows, like how are they responding. But you can also look at your late lactation cows, but I really use this one often to focus on. It's got the day production and stuff on it, so that's a good report to use, and it's a default report in your horizon. And so is report 41, your robot efficiency report, and I look at it often from both directions. I will sort by the average milkings, which ones are the highest, and how high is the average milkings on the highest cows in the herd. And in this herd, they're basically going only 4 times a day, or the highest cow seems to be going 4.1. So this would be, a very, yeah, I guess, good example, because sometimes we see that this is at 5.5. Some animals are going a lot more, but they are all, higher producing cows, the ones that are visiting more. So that is good. But we also want to look at which ones are not coming. And here we see some visits of 1.4, which we don't want to see. Probably we don't want to see 1.6, but there's not too many. The one thing on this report, for sure, you want to look at the same time then is, okay, are some of these cows close to dry off? Because that sometimes skews some of these numbers, and two of these are. But like a cow like that, 115 days in milk, 1.4 visits, we might want to dig into that a little bit better, a little deeper, what is going on. So these are all tools that you have on farm where you can, evaluate how is your milk access table actually working. At the same time, your FMS person, when you ask him, say, look at how is my milk access table actually working? He can go on LSSA and go in behind and see that and evaluate your herd. What's actually happening at the different stages of lactation. And this is again the graph. How many milkings are happening at less than 6 hours? That would be all the orange and the red. How many are in the optimum range, which is green, and how many are, over 14 hours? And like the blue is actually over 14 hours. It's not in the description, but they can also see, do you have a lot of cows with irregular intervals? And when we have an open, very open milk access table, there's a lot more opportunity for irregular intervals. And this herd is running 20 to 35% of irregular intervals, which is a lot of milkings that are, their average might look great, but the visit behavior of the cows in the barn is far from optimum. And then here, at the same time, we would also have our own graph of what is happening with visits and what's happening with refusals. And they're both on the same graph and over time. So it's actually a very good thing for us to evaluate, to see the longer term trends. And like some of these reports, we can go back up to a year. So very helpful. Also for yourself, like how did it used to be? Where was I a year ago? Talk to your FMS person because some great reporting that we can provide. One more reminder before I turn it over to Al, and that is actually your collect cow settings. And that is that the collect cow settings, they override your milk access table. So I'm not sure how many people are aware of that, but this is an example where the collect cow settings, the top is set at 10, and so that means that every cow over 10 hours is on your collect cow list. So you report 11, I think it is, but it also means that they have milking permission. Okay, so no matter what you set on the close to dry off where you're trying to reduce visits, if you have this set at 10 hours, all the cows in your barn over 10 hours have milking permission. This overrides your milk access table. So something to check, really, that this needs to stay at 14 hours, right? Unless you're in startup mode. Like some of the stuff goes, if you're just starting up, some of the stuff goes out the window. But once you're going, this needs to be at 14 hours or very close. And you better have a serious discussion with the FMS person if it's not at 14 hours, because otherwise we have a tough time controlling milkings when that is less than that. And I mean, for the rest, how this works is first this applies, and then the lower parts of the graph apply between these hours. So in this case, between 7 and 10 hours, if a cow is less than 60 days in milk, and she has less than 2.4 average visits, it'll put her on a collect cow list. So it is a good tool. But also in this example here, somebody has moved this number to 3 visits, an average. So that's also going to put extra cows on a collect cow list. And if they're on a collect cow list, they have milking permission, no matter what you originally intended. So this number needs to stay at 1.6. I can see a solid argument, and I wouldn't argue too much if you move it to 1.8. But otherwise, you're going to be fetching a lot of cows, and cows are going to be milking when you don't want them to, and when they're not supposed to. So maybe check your collect cow settings. If you don't know where to find them, talk to your FMS person that they get double checked. If you do find them and you're worried about it, contact your FMS person, please. And now we'll turn it over to Al.
We'll be diving a little bit deeper into what happens at the other level when we're dealing with leaking cows. So to begin, we need to define what a good milking process is. So we want to milk every quarter of every cow every time in such a way that we harvest all the milk. So stimulating her milk production and maximizing her potential. So how do we do this in the best way possible? In order to answer that question, we need to take a closer look at the udder. The bottom part here is called the cistern. So that always has some milk available, even without stimulation. The majority of the milk, though, is stored higher up in the alveolar tissue. So this milk can be released into the cistern by contraction of the alveolar cells. And to release that alveolar milk, we need oxytocin that will contract the cells, put it into the other cistern and ready to harvest. So teat stimulation sends a signal to the brain. You can see that on the picture here on the cow, to release oxytocin in the bloodstream. So the oxytocin travels in the blood to the other tissue, contracts the alveolar cells, and releases the milk into the cistern so that it can be harvested. So that whole process from stimulation until arrival of the oxytocin in the udder is about 60 to 90 seconds. That's what we call the lag time. Be aware, though, that adrenaline can counteract oxytocin, so we need to keep that as low as possible. So that adrenaline is also called stress hormone. So anything that can cause stress to the cow before and during milking should be avoided. Such things as pain, noise, aggressive cow handling, etc. So what happens when we have poor letdown? When we see poor letdown from post-stimulation or short lag times, we see that the cisternal milk is harvested before the alveolar milk is released. So then we see a dip or a stop in the milk flow early in the milking. The milk flow will later pick up again when the oxytocin hits the other tissue, and that's what we call a bimodal milking. A bimodal milking can cause stress on the teat, causing teat end damage, bruising, incomplete milkings due to congestion. So here you see an example. On the left, we see a good milking. We see a nice long prep time. This is as the cisternal milk is harvested, we see the alveolar milk come in, and we see a nice milk flow without interruption. On the right, though, we see a short prep time, and we see the alveolar milk is not there yet when the cisternal milk runs out. So there we see in that dip a period of low flow, and that's where we see the issues happening, like teat end stress and congestion. So here again, we see a picture of a perfect milking. We see a nice quick start here, an even high flow without any dips, and a nice quick ending. So that's what we like to see. Here's some examples of some imperfect milkings. First one, we have some connection issue. The milking itself is good, but too many connection attempts here. Second one, what we just talked about, bimodal milkings. The third one here, we see a slow ending. So often we see that when we have congestion, like in that picture there at number 3, pinching of the teat, low milk flow. And number 4, we see incorrect takeoffs, either too late on the left or too early on the right. So that can be caused by incorrect takeoff settings, or it can also be dirty pins in your MQC sensors. So then what happens then, we do not get correct milk flow readings, and that can then cause incorrect takeoff timing. So Anton discussed short intervals. So why and how does that cause milking issues? So an easy way to explain this is to think of the udder as a tennis ball. When the ball is full of milk, it's easy to squeeze the milk out. When the ball is half full, it's much harder to squeeze the milk out. So the alveolar tissue is like this. If it's full, it's much easier and takes less oxytocin to empty into the system. If it's emptier, it's much more difficult. So we see low milk flows, more stress on the teat. This is also why we have different milk access for heifers and mature cows, especially the expected milk yield number. A smaller capacity udder for heifers fills up faster than a mature cow with a larger udder capacity. So how do we prevent this happening? We need to have adequate stimulation. So we need to make sure that the brush settings in Horizon and at the robot work together. So in Horizon, we can see the regular brush settings. In Horizon, we can turn the USA brush settings on and off. So in this picture, we see the brush times on the left, and the right, we see connection times. So when we add these two up together, we get the lag time. So connection time plus brush time is lag time. So on the left here, we see, for instance, a 2x2 setting would take about 44 seconds. On the right here, we see the connection times. We see A5 definitely connecting faster than the A4 and the A3. Very important to remember that we have an average here and a median here. So an average can be skewed by a couple of really outlying cows. So we have a couple of cows with really long connection times that can really change your average. So it's better to look at the median on the right here. So the median would be the number that half your cows are faster and half your cows are slower. So in this example, if we were to pick a 2x2 on A5, we have 44 plus 20 seconds of lag time. And then still remembering that half of your cows are faster than that. So we really recommend to turn on your USA brush settings, not only for a better lag time, but also for increased brushing results, cleaner teeth. So on this illustration here, we see on the left the single pre-treatment option. On the right, we see the double pre-treatment option, and then with USA on and USA off. So if we're looking at a top line of 90 seconds here, we can see that we need 2x4, 2x5 seconds with USA on. So we looked at milk access and pre-treatment. There's a few more things to look at when we're talking about a good milking process. Liners, vacuum pulsation settings, and we also want to have a look at how we measure results. So all these factors that we just mentioned can cause congestion in the teat, if not correct. So congestion in the teat is a restriction in the teat, restricting the milk flow. We then see unharvested milk in the udder after the milking. When the cup comes off, the teat recovers, eliminating the congestion and causing the remaining milk to leak out shortly after milking. So to summarize, you can see we have different factors influencing the milking process. The main one causing leaking cows is called congestion. So here we see some pictures of some teat issues that can be caused by a not so good milking process. Things to look at is some ringing here and here, for instance, discoloration, bruising, and teat end damage. Good indication to look for as well as cow behavior during milking, such as restless cows, kicking cows, and so on. So low milk flow causes high vacuum in the mouthpiece, and that's the main cause of congestion. We see that happen when we have poor stimulation, too late of a takeoff, incorrect pulsation or vacuum levels. Liner choice is also a factor. We need the right liner for the right teat. All liners have their own characteristic, such as force required to open or close, the speed they open and close. Are they designed for shorter or longer teats, narrow or wide teats? How flexible is the opening, etc. So here we see an illustration of some problems we can see. On the top left there, we see low head vacuum. Too low head vacuum can cause liner slip or too big a diameter. You can see insufficient relief. The liner doesn't close all the way in the rest face, can cause fallen teats discoloration. Too high a vacuum or too aggressive of a massaging can cause open or damaged teat ends. Too high a mouthpiece vacuum can cause ringing and congestion. Flat teats can be caused by aggressive massage as well. And bruising or vascular damage caused by insufficient relief again. So when we're talking about robotic milking, we do have a few unique challenges versus parlor milking. So we cannot guide the teat in by hand, and we cannot push the cup up when we see liner slip. So we need a liner designed to have a soft enough opening to help the teat slip in, but it also needs to be rigid enough to have a proper seal to prevent slips. But then again, not too rigid to cause restriction. So liner choice is often a compromise because of the variety of teat sizes in a herd. So here we see the current lineup of Lely liners. We see the rubber on the left-hand side. We only got the European one here in Canada. And then we see the S series in the different sizes, also called the Comfort series. On the right, we see the M series or classics. And then in the middle, we see the new Scala liner. So that one was recently introduced. And remember to combine the right liner with the right shell. You guys will be getting this information sent to you, so you have this. So the classic set, or the M, is our oldest one. It generally works best for longer teats. The S, or the Comfort series, came out about, I believe it was about 6 years ago. It's designed mostly for shorter teats. And the Scala is kind of a combination of the two. It's more of an all-round liner suitable for a variety of teat sizes. So we do have them going now on a few farms, and we're seeing really good results on them. So as we talked about, each liner has its own characteristic. So make sure you follow recommended setting for vacuum and pulsation. If you do change to a different type liner, we do highly recommend to do this when you have a tech around to make sure that your pulsators are set correctly. So how do we check if we're doing things right? As we talked about, a visual inspection is always a good thing. Watch your milking once in a while. Look at the teat end conditions, teat condition itself, and look for cow behavior. Second one we can do is live testing. So we can do a wet test during milking with a body or similar machine. We can measure vacuum at a teat end, mouth speed vacuum, milk flow profile, etc. And then through the Lely Service Support app, or LSSA, on the FMS side, we can look at herd performance to see how many bimodal cows we have, what the percentage of bimodal cows is. We can see cows with slow starts, slow endings, connection issues, etc. And then we can drill down to a cow level even. The system will make some recommendations on certain issues. To finish up with, we have a quick look at nutrition. There are some factors that can affect the incidence of leaking cows. It is definitely more something to discuss with your nutritionist than with us. We do see some minerals that are related to muscle function. So if that's not correct, that little muscle at the teat end doesn't close up properly, which can cause more leaking cows. And we also have some trace minerals and vitamins that are working with the keratin plug. So if that's not correct, we can also see more leaking cows. So takeaways from this last part: good udder stimulation is important for good letdown. Correct liner fit, correct settings, and regular maintenance of the robots are important. Monitor the milking process visually on a regular basis. We can check in the background the milking process and double check your nutrition. Any questions or issues, contact our technical guys or your FMS people. And that was my part. Now we open up for questions.
All right. Yeah, please put any questions that you have in the chat so that we can see them. There was a question earlier that was already answered, and that was, are bimodal milkings the same as irregular milkings? Well, they're not quite the same, but I would say that quite regularly we see them in the same herds. When somebody is having a lot of irregular milkings, it's more common to also see bimodal milkings. Yeah, any other questions, please throw them in the chat. I want to add maybe to one point that Al made, that the equipment needs to be clean, and the pins on your MQC sensors actually see the milk flow. And we have seen a few cases where farmers are using a non-Lely acid or a non-approved acid, where that was not the case, and it was actually causing the milk flow not to be read correctly and causing takeoff issues. So if you see different behavior potentially in your takeoffs, let us know. But chemical can be a factor there also if they're not perfectly clean. All right. Going once. Twice. If there is no further questions, we'll wrap it up for today. And I would say stay tuned. We'll be doing more of these again, probably next winter into the future. If you have certain topics where you would really like to know more about, which you think might be a great topic for one of these events, please let your FMS person know so we can pass it along, and if there's enough requests for it, we'll put something together.